Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Scott Parker Goes Live. For those who don't know me, I've been called a covert human rights campaigner. Others, I expect, describe me more as a social entrepreneur and thought leader who invented the first business-owned disability network and has a long career persuading senior executives that treating people properly, including people with disabilities, is good for business, and then showing them how. Some argue that I have supped with the private sector devil so long, with that famous long spoon, that I have in fact gone over to the dark side. Whatever you call me, after some 30 years hacking away at this, I'm still asking the questions that I think really matter. Why is it so hard to get "and what about disability" into the ethical and responsible AI debate? Why do so many of the diversity managers who describe diversity as a choice choose not to tackle disability discrimination? And since when is treating people fairly and with respect defined as a choice? Well, I guess you could argue not robbing a bank is a choice. Why do we have health conditions and it's other people who have disabilities? And why do we just take it for granted that HR practitioners don't have a clue about the impact of disability discrimination on, well, their human resources? I don't know about you, but I expect a doctor to know the difference between your elbow and your knee. And with all that said, let's dive into this episode.
Susan, you've spent decades challenging the status quo on a disability adjustment management. So why now? Why was 2025 the time to produce Everybody Wins a Balloon?
Well, I guess it's because I spent decades wondering why it feels too hard, why so few organizations have actually moved from ad hoc, make it up as we go, to a managed, seamless process. I just got frustrated, I guess. And because, of course, it's proving so difficult to put forward the argument, because, of course, so much of the data that's relevant is hidden, often hidden to the board of a particular organization, but certainly hidden if you're trying to influence the community of global companies that should be actually addressing this as a priority.
Susan, you often talk about the stuckness you see in organizations when it comes to adjustment management. Same barriers, same excuses, year after year. How do you hope that Everyone Wins a Balloon will finally get them out of the stuckness?
Well, I'm hoping that it will enable our allies in these companies to convey some new messages. And by allies, I mean, of course, people with disabilities who are employed in those organizations, as well as the managers inside who just know that it shouldn't take so long. It shouldn't be so hard to give people the tools and flexibility they need just to get on with it and do their jobs. We're trying to make this shift that says, for most organizations, they think that making adjustments is something they have to do by law, and that they don't really know why. They think it's special treatment for people, you know, and that actually it's never reached the point of attention at senior management level that where you can get the decision makers to say, actually, this is one of those examples of where treating people properly, our legal obligation, is also good for business, because all we're being asked to do is to make it easier for people to do their jobs. And the word reasonable means reasonable. So if you have a waitress job to fill and the woman in front of you says she has a disability, so she wants to work from home, no, that's not reasonable. But if you've got someone in front of you who, with the case that we just saw recently with Green King, he's a chef. He's struggling a bit because of his dyslexia to read the orders that he's supposed to fill. And all he needs is a cheap and cheerful little Bluetooth ear thing. And they didn't give it to him. So not only did they lose a good employee because he was getting good ratings, they lost productivity. They have to replace him, and they have a £24,000 fine. And so we're kind of stuck there. And the question is, why don't you just give him the earpiece, which enables him, which reads out to him what he's got to do, so we just can go ahead and do it. So the stuckness is we still think that we're talking about the individual's problem, as
Mm.
opposed to enhancing productivity across the piece. We're
Mm.
still thinking that actually this is a doctor's thing.
Yeah.
So would you send someone with dyslexia to a doctor? Why would you do that? You're just going to give him what he needs so that he can read more readily. That's the stuckness. And I think there's another one, which is the organizations still position this as an HR issue. But actually, the only way you treat disabled people fairly, you could argue treating anybody fairly, is to treat them differently, is to take into account that you're being barrier-free for groups. And so that's like an accessible website. And you're making adjustments for individuals.
Yeah.
And so that could be moving a parking bay for someone who's now on crutches, but wasn't on crutches last year.
Yeah.
And so HR cannot control the chief technology officer who needs to make the websites accessible, and HR can't control facilities management who move the parking bay. So you can't leave the provision of tools and flexibility that enable people to be productive to HR. So that's where I was hoping would break through that kind of stuckness.
So, Susan, who exactly is this guide designed for? If you had to wave a magic wand and it would land on the perfect desks in every corporate office, where would you want it to be and what do you want them to do with it?
Well, I must confess, I spent weeks, months probably, drafting this for senior people in the business world and the public sector, of course, because the public sector also struggles to make adjustments sensibly. But I couldn't get any further with it because I thought they're not going to read it. Why would the chief operating officer at Bank X or Company Y, why would they read this? Because they think that, one, they don't know they have a problem because the data isn't there. And two, they think it's somebody else's issue. It's not really a business thing. It's kind of fluffy and medically. And so where I kind of got inspired was when I started to talk to my colleagues at Purple Space. They had asked people with disabilities in work around the world, what are the 3 things that you want your employer to do that would make it easier for your career to really thrive, right? And so, of course, it's tell stories that normalize the experience of disability, because everyone is either disabled or might be disabled, maybe probably will be, given 1 in 3 people aged 50 to 64 have a disability. The second request was make adjustments, give us the tools, the flexibility. And the third one, of course, was learning directly from your own people. They're all connected, of course, because it's when your chief executive is talking to your own people that he realizes that some of them are waiting months for something perfectly straightforward that should enable them to get on with it. And so it was because Purple Space, mobilizing leadership from people with disabilities in work, were looking at this issue. I thought, well, why don't I write it for disability employee networks, disability ERGs, because it gives them some ammunition to sit down with a senior executive to say, look, these are the 12 critical success factors. This is about changing systems. These are systematic truths that are eternal. If you ask a manager to pay for an adjustment, it will take longer. I mean, that's just as true as Newton saying apples fall down, which is why there's apples in my document, right? And so while it is written for the disability ERG leader, it's because the leader is going to sit down with his COO or his CEO and say, let's just go through some of these sort of principles. And I put in a kind of audit tool at the back where it's more of a, we used to call it proof points, if something's working, this is what you're going to see, hear, and feel, even if you haven't got data. And if it's not working, this is what you see, hear, and feel. And so, of course, if it's not working, no, say the first question would be, do managers, people in this organization find it easy to request an adjustment and figure out what's going to happen? So people will go, no, I don't think so. No. If it's not working. If it's working, people go, yeah, right? People have a sense. And so it's a structured framework for the conversation that helps senior leaders to see that they need to do better. and that this is driving business improvement. This is not getting better medical diagnostic notes, because doctors have medical skills. They don't have job solutions. They have no idea usually what range of software is available for people with various neurodivergent conditions that enable them to concentrate or plan things more carefully, or they can tell you sometimes what your diagnosis is, but the diagnosis doesn't tell a manager what to do. And so that was my aim. It's targeted at employee networks, but in the knowledge that it gives them a conversation and new insights when they're talking to senior leaders.
And also perhaps an excuse to meet with a senior leader and broach the subject. I think that's also quite a useful way of looking at it. Why do you think organizations still treat adjustment management as an afterthought instead of really engineering the process?
Well, because they haven't seen the link to enhanced productivity and that it's a business improvement, they still think they're managing sickness, damage, dysfunction. And so the image I use is, if your chief finance officer was left-handed, and of course everybody's got the right-handed mouse in the business, and that's a true story. One of the big banks in Canary Wharf opened up with 9,000 right-handed mice for 9,000 workstations, right? 10% of the workforce is left-handed, yeah. And so I'm saying, if your CFO has got one of these and is starting to complain that they're getting cramps and their hands uncomfortable, you just give them a left-handed mouse. But if that guy had lost that hand in a car accident, you'd send him to a doctor. And so we're just working to get to the place where you don't think doctors, you think left-handed mice. The workplace solution using technology and all of these solutions now that are out there, including, of course, flexible policies and procedures. And as I said, in terms of the stuckness, it's the assumption that somehow HR just do this. When HR, one, they don't understand disability discrimination, or we wouldn't keep seeing the kind of cases going through the courts that are all about just not providing the flexibility and so on. But even more importantly, if you like, they don't have the power to drive business improvement across other functions. And so the chief productivity officer is missing. And I was hoping that by looking at a new way of looking at the data, we might be able to provide ammunition to allies that would spark this new conversation.
So you've called this work engineering fit for purpose adjustment management. Why this specific language?
Well, I'm trying to make the case that this is a business transformation with principles that shape it. And so the 12 critical success factors, you need somebody at the very top whose job it is to make this work. You need someone managing it. Managers don't pay. The other ones here, because I can never get past managers don't pay. Employees are trusted to self-refer. If you require people to prove they're disabled enough to get the left-handed mouse, or more importantly, I guess, because that's a kind of a flip analogy, is requiring people to prove they're disabled enough to be treated properly. Because that's the way it feels when you move down into that compliance culture way of working. And so the Government of Canada survey found something like 77% of people with visible disabilities have to prove they were disabled enough before they got what they were asking for. And then they wondered, of course, why they had so many disgruntled disabled colleagues. And I would argue that if I've been, the classic story, true stories, I've got 2 companies now that have done this. An employee says, that light bulb is giving me migraines and that's why I'm off work so often. So the individual in the first company I encountered this had waited 18 months and they still hadn't changed the light bulb because they hadn't put into the contract with the FM provider who was going to order the light bulb and decide which bulb and how they were going to pay for it and pay for installation and all that. And then you had contracts with occupational health and you had contracts with health and safety, and the procurement stuff in the middle was just so difficult because the guys at the top didn't realize that HR didn't control adjustments. They were using suppliers, outsourced suppliers, who had direct impact on how quickly and effectively they responded when people needed stuff to be flexible. And so the kind of the saga there leads us to looking at the kind of data collecting that where you don't say how many people can you persuade to tell you they have a disability. You ask for how long are people waiting for their adjustments? How quickly is it going to happen? And that has to be managed. And so I wanted the word management there because you hear workplace adjustment. What? No, it has to be a managed process. GSK talk about it as a managed service line. So they've got a guy whose job it is to manage the end-to-end service. And just as though you were getting Amazon to deliver you a parcel, the service, has to ensure that from the request to the delivery, you have as few stops as possible in the middle. The customer, the employee asking, and often their manager, right? Because the manager wants this person to get what they need. They get the right solution. It's installed. It doesn't just sit on their desk, but somebody actually installs it, teaches them how to use it, and away they go, end to end. 20 days. The employer should be looking at perfectly realistic expectation and so that's why I put adjustment management. When I say engineering, it's because just as when you put too much sand into concrete, it falls over. If you make managers pay, it falls over.
Yeah.
And if you require people, if you don't trust your people, if you're leaning over saying, well, somebody will abuse it and ask for 2 left-handed mice, right? Or the classic case, one of the banks in the UK, I can still remember the CTO talking to an audience where he thought they were all fellow techies. He didn't know they had some HR people in the front row. He said, we just hired a very senior lawyer. She's blind. She's highly paid. And he made that point three times in his presentation. She's highly paid. And she said when she joined, all I need is a Braille keyboard. And so HR, and he looked at the audience, he said, and HR said, well, I'm sorry, but you'll have to see occupational health. And so the weeks go by while they wait to get in to see occupational health. And he looked at the audience and he said, and then, yes, occupational health agreed she was blind. Now, he took that story and turned to an engineering project where they now got a process that usually delivers within 20 days. And the point is they've got an in-house catalog. Because procurement, of course, play the game where there's only one provider of a Braille keyboard in town, but you have to go out and find 3 providers and assess their bids and all that. And so what they've done now is they have got procurement pre-approved, a catalog of kit that you can just go in now and click, and she would now get her Braille keyboard within 24 hours. Just clicks it and in it comes, right? That's what the engineering's about, is seeing this as a business process. It's just got to be managed, got to be done. And then, of course, you cut sickness absence. And we've seen evidence 60 to 70%. You enhance investment in wellness programs. Talk about stuckness. I can't get over how many people do wellness programs and haven't noticed that the opposite of wellness is migraines, say. And so the unwellness is triggered by management failure to change the light bulb. So a wellness program would ensure you change light bulbs real quick. But they never mention the need to make adjustments. Disability or health-related adjustments. They just sort of do, I don't know, exercise rooms and fruit in the lobby, right?
And I love the fact that you've come back from moving from ad hoc to managed to process driven to the focus being productivity. I'm not doing you a favor, it's enhancing this person's productivity, which enhances the bottom line for us at the end of the day. You worked with global businesses and disability forums for decades. How did their input and their needs, or frankly the failings, shape how this document ended up?
Well, I think what we learned is starting with the demand for data is a dead end. Because the assumption is that the data is how many disabled people we have. And in an organization where you have to go through this ordeal to prove you're disabled enough to qualify for something that would make it easier, well, you'll never have meaningful data about how many disabled people you have. I talk about how many people you can persuade to confess, right? Because I can remember a bank in Canada, they had a full-time woman whose job was to try to get people to confess so they could get their numbers up, because they had to report publicly on how many people they had with disabilities. And the number doesn't tell you what to do. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of your workforce have told you. So what do you do with that? There's no right number. And that the data that we're looking for is about the company's performance, not about how many you can count. And so we know that enhancing your adjustment performance, because you're managing it, means that you can now collect useful data. How many people who need visually adjustments related to visual impairment have asked? None. Is that because you don't have anybody with a visual impairment? And then that could take you down a line of inquiry. But how many have asked could also mean that you haven't told anybody you've got a service. So we see companies now that would bring, Microlink, probably the world's leading specialists in job solutions in this space, and then not tell their employees they've got a service because they're worried that they would have to pay as people come through. But of course, what we see with cases like the one I mentioned earlier is it costs you £24,000 in fine for a process that would have cost you £900 if you'd gone through a microlink, right? And so I'm hoping that what we've learned over the years is that if management focuses on performance data, not disability data, so their own performance data, then we can really liberate leaders to, in effect, justify going ahead and managing this in a sensible way. And the kind of data, of course, that interests me is how long people wait, the kind of adjustments, the cost per adjustment that you're actually managing. But what you also learn about who is saying no. Because what we need is a policy that says we're going to encourage managers to just say yes. The assumption is you're going to say yes. That trust-based system. And that if you don't quite know what's needed, it's not a left-handed mouse. It's, the individual has just acquired their disability. They're not sure what they need. That you've got a quick and efficient assessment process in there, bringing experts in like Microlink. And then, you've got a delivery system. This data is vital because you can spot who's saying no. So as I was saying, the managers need permission to say yes. But anytime a manager wants to say no, you can't have a £5 piece of kit in your ear. That has to go up the line for approval, because there's no way a senior executive is going to approve denying an adjustment without asking for a reason. And so the manager has to say, I don't like him, because I think sometimes human beings are getting in the way, right? It's not actually a management decision. It's just don't like the guy. He's too much trouble. So the individual request to deny goes up from the manager to a senior executive who can then see across the business what's going on. Because what we found when a UK bank first developed best practice here is they had no idea that managers were out there ordering chairs. Because chairs, of course, if you've got back pains, all kinds of issues, chairs matter. And because they had bought cheap and nasty chairs in the first place, so a lot of people needed better chairs. But the point was they had no idea that they had bought 500 chairs across the business last year because it was all coming out from different sources. And so Microlink went in and looked at the procurement issues and got the price of the chairs down on volume by, I don't know, a couple £100 each. So you lose those cost savings because you don't know what's going on. And if the request to deny an adjustment goes up to one person, they can start to wonder why we're denying so many colleagues so many things, or why we're always denying them flexi time, always denying work from home, or always denying on the grounds that the medical report didn't seem to indicate the need. And in some companies where they rely on doctors, if the doctor says, "Now this person isn't really disabled," the fact that they still need something that would make it easier gets overlooked, right? And what does the doctor know about whether or not the fact that you are a person of short stature, well, you could argue, what do they need that's special? Well, maybe the chair actually is causing them huge discomfort day by day. What do doctors know? That's my point.
And I think also, again, the point you're making about when they consolidated the information, when it went from ad hoc to process, they had better data to work with, and they could actually use that to their benefit. And I think what we saw with that earpiece case was specifically the brand damage. We
Yeah.
saw it all over social media. I think there's a cost to that as well. So I think just weighing up the factors and just looking at this as, nobody asks for an adjustment for fun. This is
And
not
I
a
would
fun
just,
process.
and that brand reputation thing, I would just add that if you're an employee who's asked for something perfectly reasonable and it's taking 18 months to change a light bulb,
Yeah.
I bet you've told at least 3 colleagues that you're cross, disappointed, feel bullied. And I think occasionally you see on employee engagement surveys, the stat that said for the UK Civil Service some time ago, I think it might still be the same, that when civil servants were asked, have you felt bullied in the last 12 months? There was a 15 percentile point difference in that they were more likely to feel bullied by 15%. And I think that is if you've been told time and time and time again, just wait, just wait, just wait, just wait. Doesn't that feel, how many times can you ask your boss before you start to think, this is about me, he doesn't like me, it's something about me.
Yeah.
And so the benefit there, of course, is in management seeing that you're enhancing employee engagement, not just from the individual who thinks, okay, I'm being treated properly here, but the 3 people they would have told otherwise. So it's suddenly a much wider negative impact in terms of culture than I think people ever anticipate. I was with a group of people with disabilities from a particular company not long ago, and they all knew that somebody was being treated unfairly. They all knew, right? It goes right across.
And it does ripple, like you said, that engagement with your employees as a team. When somebody is suffering and really having a hard time of it, it will naturally ripple out and affect others. Susan, the title choice, Everyone Wins a Balloon, seems very deliberate. I want to find out a little bit more about your thinking and, what it symbolizes.
Well, part of the stuckness that we were talking about earlier is the jargon, the assumption that somehow this is a legal obligation or maybe not, that it's tedious, and that the only person who wins is the individual, that somehow this is just the person who's going to get some kind of special privileged treatment. And so I was also conscious of the fact that nobody reads anything about workplace adjustments. Well, we're in a world where you're lucky if they read anything now, right? And so I was just trying to lighten it up a bit. But the big message here is the business wins, the individual wins. And when you look at the broader scope, enabling people with disabilities to be economically active, because you're making adjustments in recruitment as well as when they're in employment. You keep them in work so they don't go on benefit when they acquire their disabilities. And most people acquire their disabilities in their 30s and 40s in work. We never talk about that, right? So the other premise, of course, was that if you can't make adjustments for people you already have when they acquire their disabilities, well, why the hell would you hire someone with a disability and put them into that?
Exactly.
Right? And so in terms of talent acquisition, you win, talent retention, you win, productivity, you win, and of course the economy then starts to do better. You don't have the huge numbers now sitting on benefits that you've got in the UK, because the message has got out that the employer community knows what it's doing and that their job is to be barrier-free for groups, adjust for individuals, and enable everyone to contribute to business success. That message is not going out now. So Everybody Wins a Balloon was a hope that it might prompt somebody to read it just wonder what's in there.
Definitely an intriguing title. Susan, as a final question, if we've got a leader listening today, somebody in a environment who can actually, make this change, who can actually start adopting this, what would your final message be to people who can actually get the ball rolling?
Appoint one person to drive you from where you are now to having a managed system. Avoid all these committees where you've got diversity who have no power over any of this, and you've got HR and technology and all these people coming together. Give the job to one person to make it happen. Learn directly from your own people. Ask what happens when now, or you could bring in specialists like Microlink who have been doing this for 20 years and just start to move into fix-it mode right now. But I suspect for most organizations, what happens when, and going through the checklist at the end of my guide, to take a look at where it's fit for purpose and where it's not, and the messaging around it. Because so long as business leaders convey, we're going to comply with the law, we don't trust our people, you have to prove you have a disability, those sorts of messages, you're going to have to counter that. You're going to have one person managing it with a senior executive responsible for reporting back into the C-suite to say, we're going to get this down to 20 days. It will be trust-based. We've got the 12 critical success factors there, and I've got somebody working on it. And try not to just endlessly talk about it, and be absolutely clear that when you've got this process designed and managed, that you're going to tell every employee in the business 3 times a year, including every manager, that it exists, and that when you've got mandatory training for managers, they will be told every time they go into a management training session that they expect to be, they're required to ask in every performance review, how can I make it easier for you to do your job? That's the game we're in. And at the moment, I don't know that there's any company that's got a management training program on how to do performance reviews that says, this is what we expect you to say for people who might need an adjustment. But you will always say, how can I make it easier for you to do your job? So that's giving people permission to say, well, you could let me come in late. You could let me shift from day shift to night shift, whatever it is.
And Susan, I think for every single employee, that would be valuable.
Absolutely right.
And it comes back to your point of the chief productivity officer and the core idea here being enabling people to do the job that they're being paid to do to the best of their ability.
And you were asking me what we've learned over the years by listening to business. Well, there was an investment bank in the UK that decided that managers would say, when doing a performance review for a colleague with a disability, how can I make it easier for you to do your job? And then all the other people started saying, what about me? Why aren't you asking me? I've got childcare. I'm taking care of a 90-year-old mother, whatever. And so now I think they just say, how can I make it easier for you to do your job? So maybe I should have called this document, how can I make it easier for you to do your job?
Episode 2. Well, Susan, I'm also very happy to share with our audience that this resource is available for free. We will make sure that the links are accompanying this video and available on our podcast provider. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Are there any final thoughts from you before we close up this session?
Well, try to avoid committees and try to get your COO focused on productivity, because not many companies have a chief productivity officer, I'm afraid. Just go straight there and learn directly from, and don't try to reinvent wheels.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Susan. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Thank you very much, Anel.
If you found this content relevant and perhaps even thought-provoking, please feel free to share with your networks.